Good Shabbos and Good Yontiv. We are in the midst of the holiday of Sukkot, and we're coming to the final closing moments of Sukkot, which is Shemini, Atzeret, and Simchas Torah. And Sukkot is one of the most joyous holidays in the Jewish calendar. We're told, "V'samachta b'chagecha," you shall rejoice, you should be happy, our holiday. And of course, we all know in Simchas Torah, the day itself, what we call it, the happiness of the Torah, the joy that we have in finishing the Torah and starting the Torah. We dance with the Torah. It's a day to celebrate our Judaism, our tradition, our laws, our devotion to God. And therefore, you would think that it would be just completely one of happiness. But yet, we're going to have a Yizkor service. And we know that the Yizkor service, of course, brings up the mourning for our relatives that have passed away. And it's a strange mix of being happy and being sad at the same time. But we know that Judaism does this all the time. We have a wedding, and at the wedding, sort of the happiest time for a bride and groom, the groom has to smash a glass to show that we're going to also not to forget the fact that the temple in Jerusalem was destroyed and that we're in exile. We're mixing always these different signs and different symbols of happiness and mourning. Even on Tisha B'Av, which we're celebrating or we're remembering the fact that two temples were destroyed, we don't say certain prayers, Tachnun, which is usually only reserved, those days that we don't say Tachnun are reserved for days which are somewhat joyous. Why? Because we say that on Tisha B'Av is the day when the temple will eventually be rebuilt. So we consider it a moed, a holiday. So even on the sad days, we mix in some joy and happiness. So some would say, when we put the mourning into the happiness, like let's say at a wedding, maybe the message is very simple. You think you're happy now, don't get carried away. Remember that we have something to be sad about. Remember all the sad times. If you get carried away with the happiness that you have at the time of your wedding, you are going to forget that you have to still move in the direction of rebuilding the temple, of bringing yourself closer to God, of doing tshuva, of repenting, and really coming to a different level of a relationship with the Creator. But maybe there's a different message. Maybe the message is that when we have sadness, when we have all these sad occasions and memories, maybe we're teaching us that we have to learn how to deal with the mourning. We have to deal with the tough times that we go through. So when we have a real reason to mourn, when someone passes away or someone has passed away, we want to show that we could still have simcha, we could still have happiness. Because we should not forget that there's always something to be joyous about. There's always something to look forward to. It reminds me of a story in the Talmud about Rabbi Akiva. Rabbi Akiva, one of the most famous rabbis in the Talmud, at the age of 40 decided that he was going to give up the life that he had before and he was going to devote his time to learning Torah. And at that same time, he married a woman who was the daughter of one of the wealthiest people in Israel. But his father-in-law said, if you're going to put time to study and you're not going to be involved in the business with me, I'm going to cut you off. And he cut him off from his inheritance. And he and his wife, Rabbi Akiva and his wife, lived in complete poverty. And the story goes in the Talmud that Eliyahu came to their door, knocked on their door, and he said, oh, my wife is pregnant, and we don't even have straw to sleep on. Could I please maybe borrow or have some straw? And Rabbi Akiva turned to his wife and said, you see, there are people that have less than us. We should be happy. And he said, therefore, he and his wife said, you know what? We can go and learn. We might have less food on our table, but we have a roof over our head. We have straw to lay down on. So we're not in such bad shape. Now, on the one hand, you could say, you shouldn't only have to learn your lesson because there's other people that are worse off than you, but it's a lesson that's very simple. It's saying that things could be worse. We should always be happy with what we have, as I always refer to Isaiah Asher, who's wealthy, hasamech b'chalko, someone who's happy in his lot. But it's saying that we have to realize that we still have something to look forward to. We still have something to live for. And that's something that when we come to Yizkor, we should try to remember those that lived in the past. We're living now in a time of COVID, and you could say these are very harsh times. It's hard for us socially, it's hard for us emotionally, it's hard economically, and some of us have been getting ill. Thank God in Halifax that we're not having that to a large degree. But many of us, as I've said other times, have been touched by COVID, have been touched by illness, have seen family, relatives, friends in other places that have been stricken with COVID, and some have passed away. So on the one hand, you could say, well, we're in a very tough time. We have to bemoan the fact that we're not able to gather in shul the way we did before. We're not going to be able to celebrate Simchas Torah the way we did before. We can't hold hands. We can't eat together. We can't eat socially together. We can't even get close to each other. We have to cover our faces. We can't even see the emotions on our friends' faces. It's very tough times. But on the other hand, we have to say that we are happy because we still have what to live for. We still have a future. And however small that hope is, there's still something there. I have to remember I'm going to be saying Yizkor for my mother, and my mother died younger than she should have. She was in her 70s, but she didn't live the length of time that her father and mother lived, 20 and 30 years longer than that. And she wasn't someone, I don't think, who said, who welcomed the idea of living a martyr's life and dying young. But when she realized that she was dying and she was very sick, she all of a sudden got a new strength. And she was able to say to herself, you know what, I had a good life. She wasn't looking forward to living a long life anymore. But she had that simcha, that joy that she had her whole life. My mother was full of simcha her whole life. And this was a terrible lesson that she was learning. She was still able to regain a level of simcha. Not simcha that she was necessarily sitting and laughing, but a simcha, a happiness in the fact that she looked back at her life and she says, I had a good life. She thanked God for what she had, the fact that she had children, the fact that she had grandchildren, the fact that she had meaning in her life. And she was able to learn from her experience of suffering and looking forward to death and say, no, I'm still have simcha. She was able to take that simcha and let it override this sadness that she had. And there's something very interesting. We as a family were afraid to even share the fact that she had cancer and that she was actually dying, and we were afraid that would really harm her. And actually, the opposite happened. And as I've read since then, that sometimes the fear of the unknown is much worse than the fact that somebody, for example, is dying. Fear in itself is the worst thing. When we know for sure where we're heading, for good or for bad, we're able to face the reality. And when we face that reality, we can look back and say, okay, we had something good. We have something either in the future, we have something in the past, we're leaving a legacy, I'm leaving children, I'm leaving friends, I've impacted the world. There's always something that someone could look at and say, there's something of value that I have, either to look forward to or in the past. And therefore, I think it's important that when, for example, when we got stricken with COVID, everyone's sort of like very depressed. And if we knew at the time that this would last for so many months and maybe even a year or years, we would have been very depressed. But what happens is after you get used to that and you don't have the fear of the unknown, you know what you're living with, then you have to be able to focus on what you do have. So if somebody has an illness or someone had a tragic death in the family, you're struck with sadness. But what Judaism is teaching us is that we have to somehow mix the joy and the happiness with the sadness. And hopefully the simcha, the joy, the happiness overcomes the sadness. And we always have to realize that there's something to look forward to. And therefore we have something to live for. So we might not be having the greatest Simchas Torah this year, but we're still alive. We're still here in shul. We still have our community, and we still have a future. It might take a little while. It might take longer than we like, but eventually we'll come back to that place where we have simcha. And we always have to be happy with what we have. And that's a lesson I think we learn from merging Yizkor together with the Simcha that's supposed to be on this, that is on this holiday. And if we take that message and use it in our life, and we look back at the people that we are mourning, and understanding that although it's sad that they're no longer here, they left something for us. They left something for us to be happy for. We have to take that message that we have from the Yizkor service, from Simchas Torah, from smashing a glass at a wedding, and take that and look forward to that which we have in life. Good Yontiv and good Shabbos.